we have a lot of battle wounds and scars that we're trying to shelter other people from having to, to go through that experience, in the interest of the firm and in interest in their career development. The best way to learn is through mistakes, but the really best way to learn is through other people's mistakes.
Welcome to TheSquare. My name is Brian Green, and today I'm joined by Chris Johnson. Chris is a principal and the director of the Technical Design Services team here at Corgan. Chris, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
How's life?
Life is awesome.
Life is good. Well, let's get the big question out of the way first and foremost.
Okay.
What is Technical Design Services?
So it's not what a lot of people think, because a lot of people think that I work in IT.
And you do not?
No, we absolutely do not. It's really just more or less the technical side of architecture, essentially.
So give me an example. What, like if I'm sitting, let's say I'm sitting in an office building, why do I care what Technical Design Services is doing?
Well, a really simple analogy that I like to use for people to describe kind of what our role is and what we do is we're really kind of nuts and bolts architecture, where as in the studios, they really focus more on the overall concept, the composition, right? I give this presentation about specifications sometimes that I think works well, where I put up this image of like a Formula One race car, right? And that Formula One race car is like the composition. It's a beautifully engineered piece of machinery, right? But then I cut to the next image, and it's actually it's image of a Formula One car exploded into all the various parts and pieces. It's really cool. I've actually seen it in person. It's in the Mercedes Museum in Germany. So whereas the designers and the architects, they think compositionally about how everything comes together. In technical design, we think about all the various parts and pieces. I mean, I can visualize a building like 3D exploded in my head, and that's not really what their focus is in the studio. It's about how everything looks when it comes together. But in order to get there, you have to know how all the parts and pieces fit together. Does that make sense?
I guess I don't know of anybody who goes to career day and dreams of working at Technical Design Services. Talk to me about like your journey into architecture and kind of how you ended up, in this kind of technical design realm.
I can tell you about my journey personally, and I'm sure that there are folks that work for me and with me that have kind of a similar career trajectory. But I was really torn when I went to college about whether I wanted to be an architect or an engineer. So I'm a very engineer-leaning architect. I like to understand.
That. Yeah.
You sense that? I like to understand how everything goes together. What makes it work. I'm also very into forensics. What makes things fail?
Okay.
I mean, if it paid better, I probably could have been a detective too. Yeah. So, and I'm sure there are others that are in a similar situation. But you'll note that most of the folks that work for me, on average, have between 25 and 30 years of experience, and they've all practiced. For the most part, they've all practiced as architects and designers in the past. And over time, they've acquired all this technical knowledge about how buildings go together and about all these various parts and pieces. And so they found it interesting, like I did. And so that's kind of where their career path took them over time.
So it's really not even, it's almost like a combination of like you said, detective, problem solver,
exactly,
scientist, probably to a certain degree,
right,
or chemist even, because it seems like you've got your periodic table of elements on your wall there in your office. It seems like it's kind of almost interdisciplinary in all those kind of facets.
Yeah, totally. Have you ever seen that? Did you take chemistry in high school?
I did.
Did you ever see that video where they take like a couple drops of water and pour it on a cube of sodium?
I have.
And the whole thing just explodes,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
Bad. Water bad for sodium.
We don't want
right,
that.
Right. So I don't know. Things like that have just always interested me,
So you talked about, the history that the team has and the history that you have. Talk to me about, I guess, you don't want to interfere, like you said, with the overall vision of the architect,
Right.
but you also have that wisdom. So I guess talk to me more about how do you share that wisdom without interfering in kind of that grand design?
That's a good question. What I always tell people, like when I go make a presentation to tell them, who is TDS and what do we do? I always tell them that we are not here to take over your project. We're not here to tell you what to do either. We're here to give you advice based on our experience having, it's basically, we have a lot of battle wounds and scars that we're trying to shelter other people from having to, to go through that experience, in the interest of the firm and in interest in their career development. The best way to learn is through mistakes, but the really best way to learn is through other people's mistakes. So, I don't know, sometimes I call us professional advice givers, but I do try to make it very clear to my guys that ultimately the decision of what to do rests with the design team. But our job is really to kind of tell them what the ramifications might be if they head down that path and kind of try to steer them the right way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, like, what's the makeup of the team as far as like who's doing what?
The composition of TDS as it currently exists is probably into year 5 or 6 of its existence. Originally, it was just the specification department, and there was one guy. This was back. We weren't even in this building. This was back when we were on 501 Elm. I mean, I've been here almost 28 years now. But there was one guy, and then when the firm got busier, he had to have an assistant. So then there were 2. But anyway, he retired. His name was Chuck Love. He retired in 2008, and that's when I was kind of, I don't want to say voluntold. I was basically advised that I would be a good candidate to take his place at the time. That was John Holzheimer's determination when he was here. I mean, I had the choice of not doing it, but it did sound appealing to me, So for years, we chugged along as a specification department. The firm continued to grow. But about 10 years ago, we entertained the idea of adding a specialist consultant in-house. It was a roof consultant, actually, Scott Toller, who's been with us now for, probably 6-7 years. And it was because we were having some issues with roofs on projects. We were actually being underserviced by a lot of our roof consultants, meaning, they weren't meeting deadlines. They weren't able to go out on the job site and do a punch list or observe the roof under construction when we were asking them to. It's because they were really busy.
Yeah.
So we decided to bring that skill set in-house, and Scott was kind of our first in-house specialist. But that was really so successful that, I went back to senior leadership and said, hey, what other specialists do you think would be good to have, in-house? And these guys are like legit consultants, I mean, Scott Toller actually worked for several different roof consultants here in town that we have in fact used. Mm-hmm. And he was really, happy to come on board at Corgan because he'd worked with us for years in that capacity. Same thing with, so the list they gave me was essentially an acoustician would be good. We also already had Michael Janicek doing lighting design.
Yeah.
He wasn't really hired in to join TDS as a specialist. He was actually already working with Chuck Armstrong and also with our interiors group a lot. I think actually interiors hired him, but just through some reorganization, we got Michael to do lighting design. Then we hired an acoustician, and then we hired a door and hardware consultant. And those guys were all, Grant's been doing doors and hardware for 30 years. So as the team currently exists now, it's really split in two between specialists and the specifiers. I basically have 10 specifiers now to support the firm, and then the other half are the specialists that we have.
And it seems like, I guess, the question I have is more mainly around like the market. I mean, I guess compared to other firms, I mean, where does that give us an advantage? I guess what is maybe the pro or not necessarily con, but like what are the considerations that need to be made when moving all of those people in-house?
Well, obviously, we want to make sure that there's enough work for them. I think our interiors group has really leveraged the fact that we have in-house lighting design and acoustics, because when they're competing on a project, they very quickly recognize that if we had that expertise in-house, we wouldn't have to hire, an outside consultant to fill that role needed on the project, in which case we're also paying their overhead and their profit. We bring that in-house, then, we can actually come down a little bit on our fee, which makes us more competitive.
Well, and you got to think of the time to engage too, probably at a certain point when those things are, kind of so.
And there's also, I remember back there's also a real convenience factor there, which is yet another reason why we decided this was a good idea to have these skill sets in-house. Because I remember oftentimes back when I was in the studio, before I was in technical design, I would often have questions on my project about acoustics. What does the STC rating need to be in this mechanical room, wall between this wall and the conference room next to it? It's like, gosh, I really wish we had an acoustician on this project, but we don't.
So you're just kind of making a best guess at that point? Or
pretty much, yeah. I mean, either that or you call in a favor from, it's like, hey, I know we don't have a contract on this job, but can you answer this acoustic question for me? Now we don't have to do that. I mean, Jason's right. He's a phone call away, So that's another benefit. But back to your original question about where does this put us in the marketplace? As far as I know, and of course, this is discounting what I call big E, little a firms, like the Jacobs of the world, which, they have everything under the sun in-house.
Yeah.
I think as far as pure architectural firms go, that makes us singular. I don't think there's any other architectural firms that I'm aware of, at least, that have those specialist skills in-house.
You said been doing this for 28 years. I've
been doing it here for 28 years.
Here for 28.
Yeah.
So what's the total number then?
See, I guess 33 now.
So 33 years. So what's the why? I mean, what keeps you coming back at this point? I mean, is it just?
I think the challenge. That's one of the things that I think it's like, oh gosh, technical design, that sounds really boring. I mean, back to your original question, when we started this conversation, you were talking about, so, you go to architecture school and, you're thinking about design. How do you end up doing what you do? So to many that would sound boring, but to those of us that do it, it's not. Every day is literally a challenge. And I'm not just talking about deadlines and getting the work done. I'm talking about, getting asked interesting questions that even with a number of years experience, sometimes we have to think about to answer, happens every day.
We kind of talked a little bit about, like, obviously not, being intrusive on the vision, but like, what are some of those common technical challenges that come up? Maybe this is an architect who's a little more green, or what are some of those kind of, top 3 things that you're seeing in projects that are like maybe the first things that you look for, or maybe the most things that you're being, consistently challenged with? Is there anything like that?
To be honest with you,
I would love to be honest.
The biggest challenges that we actually face are more with contractors than they are with a design team. And it has everything to do with process. There is a process of how to go through construction contract administration that has been in place for years. And it's there for a reason, but as project schedules continue to get shorter, as contractors continue to agree on, frankly, dumber and dumber delivery dates to get things done, they take certain shortcuts with that process. So I kind of feel that process eroding somewhat. And we do struggle with, mainly because of the fact that we are very service oriented and we want to be helpful. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in our effort to be helpful, we kind of let the contractor step out of line of the process. And so it's kind of like us trying to help the staff stay in line with that traditional process. A good example is when a contractor needs, if there's information missing from either the drawings or the specifications, they're supposed to submit what's called an RFI, which is a request for information. It's like, hey, this drawing on sheet such and such doesn't match, the detail on this other sheet. Which of these is correct? That would be a typical RFI, right? But nowadays, we see that process being abused where they'll use an RFI to make what's called a substitution request, which is when we have specified, we've written a spec for, let's say, curtain wall, okay? And we list, 6 or 7 manufacturers in there as acceptable manufacturers to provide curtain wall for the project. Well, what the contractor will do, there's a whole process for submitting a different manufacturer than what we specified. It's, oddly enough, called a substitution request. But the contractor, in their haste to get a response, will submit a different manufacturer as a request for information.
Meaning, I'm not even going to read this and follow through with all this.
I'm not even.
I kind of looking at it.
Can I use manufacturer number 8?
Yeah.
Instead of one of the 7
I got a bunch
that you
of
gave
this
me.
laying in the back. I would absolutely love to get rid of it. Can I use number 8 and get rid of it?
And the issue that the specifiers have with that is like, look, we gave you a choice of 7. Those manufacturers have all been vetted. We know that those 7 manufacturers can meet all the performance criteria, all the aesthetics, everything that we have for that curtain wall. Now you're giving us number 8, right? We don't know anything about number 8. It's the process for substitutions is supposed to be, you basically fill out this form, okay, about who the manufacturer is, what cost savings there are to the owner, because otherwise, what's our incentive to do it? Our incentive isn't that you have some laying around in the yard that you want to use, right? We're interested in holding the owner's performance criteria. But they're basically do a side-by-side comparison of the specified product and the one that they would prefer to use, so that we can. It's basically for us. It should be a yes or no question. Instead, what we find ourselves constantly doing is they'll submit manufacturer number 8 and say, is this okay? And they'll do it as an RFI. And we're like, where's the comparison? So now we have to research manufacturer number 8 to see, if he's equal to 1 through 7. That should be your job.
Yeah, and in that original list too, it's not like you're pulling that out of your hat. It's like you guys are taking the time and effort and energy to work, alongside the architects to make sure that this has been, not only correctly specified, but obviously to your point, like value engineered in a certain way where it's like you're getting kind of everyone's getting their boxes checked, so to speak.
Right, and so doing what the contractors are doing on their end is it's really not just about liability. It's also about the value of time, right? Because by transferring their responsibility to make that comparison to our folks in the studio, who frankly aren't qualified to make that judgment in many cases on their own. So then it comes to us.
Right.
So now we're spending our time doing what they should rightfully be doing. That's probably our biggest struggle that we face, actually, is we spend a lot of time that should be the contractor's time to spend on activities. And it's all because, they don't mean anything nefarious by it.
Yeah.
It's all about just trying to get answers fast and trying to, I used to think there was something nefarious about it. It's like, these guys are being shady but I've over time, I've come to realize that it's in most cases, there are times where they are trying to sneak something in there that's inferior or whatever. But more often than not, it's like this product is available faster or they're just trying to meet this ridiculous deadline that they agreed to.
Yeah, I think we had a conversation a few weeks ago about, you were talking about like the history of like fast track construction, about how kind of give us a little bit insight about kind of how it used to be and kind of what it is now, because I think that does inform a little bit of kind of maybe the stressors that the contractors are facing.
It absolutely does. Fast track construction used to be a thing. It was a new concept that involved essentially doing the design and construction in phases, meaning, we would start with an underground and a utility package, right? And the contractor would price that, and then as soon as they'd price it and got subs, we would start the earthwork. And then while they're doing the earthwork, we would design the foundations, And then when they're doing the foundations, we'd be designing the superstructure. When they're doing the superstructure, we'd be designing the skin, yada, yada, yada. You know, landscaping comes at the end, done. But nowadays, that's how we do every project. Fast track is no longer a thing, you know? And I'm not sure what the next thing is. Because in the old days, the fast track was a very distinctly different process than design, bid, and build, right? Those were all very three distinct things. And now those lines are blurred. It all kind of happens at the same time.
So you think the next one they'll just start building, and then and in the future we'll just have designs.
In the future we're gonna intuit it.
Yeah. Well,
bam.
And it'll just appear poof,
Yeah.
right? So I guess, is there any like particular projects? And we've talked, some doom and gloom. We've talked about, just kind of maybe some of the bigger stressors. What are those projects that you've worked on? Is there any one in particular or several that stand out as something you're particularly proud of?
This was back in the days before, we had our six sectors that we tried to stay in the guidelines on. And it was more or less when, we would pretty much do anything that came our way. And we had this odd tie-in with a developer who's actually here locally, but he had bought this old historic hotel property up in Pennsylvania, and it was basically in disrepair. But it was right next to an old Donald Ross designed golf course.
Okay.
He bought this property on the cheap from the government because they somehow owned it in foreclosure. But anyway, he had this vision of redeveloping it into a historic resort hotel. And because we had the relationship with this developer, we were hired as the prime, but we had not done a lot of historic renovation projects. And this was a very, what's the word I'm looking for? It was a very, let's just use the word interesting, design team. And of course, the core consultants, which were MEP and structural, were our choice. But we had a lot of other consultants that really weren't. It's like, here, these are your guys to work with. So in order to make this deal work, there were some historic tax credits involved. There's a certain amount of taxes that you don't have to pay if you're doing a historical renovation project. Okay. So there was a historic architecture firm as one of our consultants. And basically their entire role on the project was to make sure that in the design, we didn't do something stupid where we lost a tax credit for something. Mm-hmm. That was literally their sole purpose on the project. Then there was another architect. They were a hospitality architect, which I don't know if you've ever worked with those people, but they don't know when to put down the pencil.
Yeah, is that what? Like, give me an example of what a hospitality architect.
Hotels, resorts,
gotcha.
that sort of thing. Yeah, and so that was their specialty. But the reason this got complicated is because they had themselves done a fair amount of historic renovation hotels. They were actually based out of Richmond, Virginia.
Okay, so they're thinking.
And so these guys and the real historic architect were doing this.
Yes.
The whole project. So I'm there being the referee, right? We had a contractor that actually wasn't they were a construction manager. Things are very different in Pennsylvania than they are in Texas. Everything is union labor. Everything is more expensive than it should be. But so the design process itself was very difficult getting through that. But the project did turn out really beautiful. And I think that was the next to the last project that I did as a project manager before I took over my current role. The last one was actually One Arts Plaza right down the street.
So you talk about, so I guess.
Which was a much smoother project, by the way. We had a great contractor. We had a great design team.
Well, you talked about, how those scars, right?
Yeah.
From previous projects. It seems like you are kind of carrying those forward. I mean, in a way, how did that kind of inform, that being one of the last projects that you did, how did that inform you kind of moving into the new role and moving into TDS?
So that's a good question you ask. And that project and a couple prior to it, one of the reasons I that this role was attractive to me, honestly, is I felt like I had gotten taken advantage of by contractors a lot, and maybe they had maybe forced my hand to make some decisions, under pressure that I normally would not have done. And I kind of made it a point that in this new position, I would keep in mind back then I was, project architect, project manager. So and we're talking half a career ago. So I didn't have near as much experience then as I do now. But part of it was a little personal in that I didn't want to see young architects taken advantage of by contractors anymore.
I can agree. I mean, it's
so that's why I draw this hard line on substitution requests and following procedures and processes, because that's one thing that is really nice about specifications. Not to go too deep into the weeds on this, but
well, just for like the basic. Talk to me about like just what specifications are for someone who may not know.
So the way the really easy button version of this that I always tell people is that the specifications say what, okay, and the drawings say where.
Okay.
By what, I mean the specific, like let's say we're talking about brick, for example, okay? So the specification will say what ASTM standards that brick needs to meet, what color that brick is, what texture that brick is, what module that brick is, because they come in all different sizes. There's king size, queen size, modular, all these different sizes of brick. Standard king, if you want to get. Anyway, the point is,
there's a lot of overlap between bricks and beds. I'm picking up there.
Yes.
California king.
Yes, exactly. King, queen, right. They don't have twin bricks though. Anyway, the point is, so the spec tells the contractor what brick to buy for the job. When I say the drawings say where, drawings are about relationships, aesthetics, composition, how things go together is what the drawings illustrate. And you can't, there's this phrase in the general conditions that says the contract documents are complementary. What's required by one shall be as if required by all. Meaning, if I put something in the spec, but it's not on the drawings, they still owe us something for what we spec, which is that's a legitimate reason for an RFI.
Right.
Hey, you guys specified brick on this project. I don't see any brick on your drawings. Where does the brick go? Right. It's an RFI.
Great answer. Yeah, I got one.
And at the same time, if they draw bricks and there's no spec for it, the contractor is obligated to say, wait a minute, you got bricks all over your drawings, but you don't have a spec for the bricks. What bricks are we using, right? So that's why those two things go together the way that they do. But the thing that's nice about specifications is there's this thing called master format. And I know I'm dating myself here because the reason I know this is because when I put this in a presentation, I get these. I put this slide there on purpose of the Dewey Decimal System.
Yeah.
Right. That folks, my age used to use in libraries to look up books. And I'll put up an image of the Dewey Decimal System on the screen, and I'll say, does anybody know what this is? There's usually one person, and that person is usually over 40, that raises their hand and goes, that's the Dewey Decimal System. Well, the thing I like, and all specifiers like about specifications, is they have a very rigorous format of their own for specifications. It's actually called master format. And so what ends up happening is you will always find your brick spec in Division 4 masonry. You'll always find your roofing spec in Division 7 thermal and moisture control. And so it's just a very organized system. And I think that's attractive to some people because it's very organized,
Keeps it clean, keeps everything,
and if you understand the system, you always know where to find what you're looking for.
And as
which
much
is great, because yes, there's an AIA standard for how drawings are to be organized, but every firm kind of has their own spin on that. Elevations are A5 series, or wall sections are A6, or whatever. That can vary from firm to firm, despite what the AIA says. Master format doesn't vary. It is the industry standard, at least in United States and Canada and Mexico, North America, essentially.
It's nice that you said, they're complementary, and it's nice to take that kind of a little bit further in the meta, and that, like, in a drawing, there's probably everything's there that needs to be, and there's probably not a lot of wasted ink, so to speak.
That's yet another reason why we have specifications, because if you tried to put everything that was in the specs on the drawings, it would just be full of notes. You wouldn't be able to read the drawings.
Yeah, it would just look like
because I mean, what we tell people, as we coach them, not tell them what to do, but coach them, on their drawings, we want to see a note that says brick 1. And then they go to the specs, division 4. Brick 1 is this. It's this color, it's this texture, it's this manufacturer, it's this module, da-da-da-da-da. The less words on the drawing, the better. Then every once in a while, we run across, notes on the drawings. What was the one I saw recently? I think it was a loading dock lift. And they, not only did they put a manufacturer for the loading dock, but they also put they put the model number and they put the capacity, and of course it did not match the specification that we wrote for it. So that's essentially building conflict into your documents, which we try to avoid as much as we can.
So we've kind of talked about the history, kind of talked about just kind of what the current your kind of current role as far as supporting the architects. I guess one of my last questions is like, what is the future of TDS? Not only like in the firm, but just kind of just in general.
At least on the specification side, there is a lot of talk about AI, and in the future we won't have to write specifications. It's AI can do it all, which I believe is true. But the kind of fly in the ointment as far as that statement is concerned is that in order for AI to write specifications, what's in the model has to be input in a very disciplined manner. You have to have very intricately structured Revit families inside the model in order for that to work. Because basically what we're saying is, you don't need humans to write the specifications. AI can do it. That's only true if the model is accurate enough to tell AI what to specify.
It always comes. It's always like, I think the main argument, right? It's always been like, what is the source of the information that you're teaching it, right? And if that's bad data, or if that's corrupt in any way, then
that was always the vision for BIM.
Yeah.
In the first place, is that it is in fact a building information model, but that information is only as good as
you keep up with
what was put into
exactly.
It. Right. And they've been talking for years about Revit talking to specs. There was this program many years ago called eSpec, but they found at that time that it wasn't working because people weren't modeling with enough discipline for the model to tell the specifier what to include in the specifications. We're on a new software right now called VisiSpecs, and we are actually starting to delve into that now. And I think things have progressed along far enough now that we will be able to do that. But then the next step, logically, in 10 years or so, is that hopefully that modeling is sophisticated enough that in fact AI can write the specifications, which honestly is probably a good thing because specifiers really aren't being replaced in the industry. It's a very difficult job. It's a very stressful job because my guys go from one deadline to the next. Because when you think about it, there's probably at least 7, maybe 800 technical staff in the firm now, and there's 10 specifiers to support all of them. So we never have to worry about meeting U-rates on my team. We have plenty of work to do.
One question we were kind of talking about this before we started was, it's the capital S sustainability question. But as someone who would, I think you would say that you're a fan of the outdoors, a fan of nature and the environment. I guess, how do you kind of carry that role and a love for nature and a love for, just the earth, full stop period, in kind of supporting, the sustainability initiatives and things that we have going on at Corgan right now?
As far as the specifications go, it's really not that hard because most of the manufacturers out there are completely on board with the green movement that's been around, 20 or so years now, and they're actually they recognize a long time ago that it's imperative to their success as a product manufacturer to ride the green wave, so to speak. A really easy example to wrap your head around is that 20 years ago, as far as paints go, probably 50 to 60% of them were still solvent based, which have very high VOCs.
Is
right?
that excuse me? Is that like there's
Like
not
oil based, like
okay,
oil-based
okay,
paint.
but not like lead based, right? Because that's
No, lead went away a long time
Okay.
ago. Yeah, that was like
Good.
1972. I
okay. I
think.
gotcha.
Yeah, don't eat those lead chips, by the way.
I will not.
That's bad for you. No, I'm talking about. There's two types of vehicles for paint pigment. There's a solvent and there's water, right? Solvent is what we typically think of as oil-based paint, and then water is like latex.
Okay.
Probably maybe 5% of paints now are still solvent-based. Everything has gone water-based. The only ones that are still solvent-based are ones that there's just really no water-based equal for. They're very high-performance coatings, like urethanes, but now even some urethanes are water-based, or epoxies, also mostly water-based, but there are still some in those categories that you would use like on architecturally exposed steel that needs like really high durability, like what we would put on exposed columns in an airport or something like that. Those are still solvent-based, but pretty much everything else these days is water-based. And that is a direct result of trying to lower those VOCs and make, LEED compliant and sustainability directed product.
So it's one less thing you have to worry about.
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. I mean, it's really been very easy to convert our specs to being sustainable. Now, when it comes to getting certifications, that's a whole different level because manufacturers have things that are like an EPD, which is Environmental Product Declaration. There's an LCA, which is a life cycle assessment document that they can do. And these have all become part of the certification process, which, like I said, is kind of another level of attention that we have to go through on the specifications when you are trying to do something that's like LEED certified. But as far as just having a green specification where we're specifying paints, coatings, sealants, things of that nature that are low VOCs and meet that green threshold. Products with recycled content, wood products with no added urea formaldehyde. That's all. The manufacturers have been really helpful in that regard and have made it really easy for us to write specs where the products they provide will meet those requirements.
And you can sleep easy at night.
Yeah, absolutely.
Knowing that you've suggested something that is not good.
Yeah. And what's so funny is when that thing started, LEED was kind of what started this, but actually there are a lot of, like, City of Dallas is a really good example of this. A lot of the stuff that was in the first version of LEED has now been codified in the building codes. That's where we get the International Green Construction Code, right? And it is like LEED light. Like, they're not going to make people use certified wood because that's expensive, but there are VOC thresholds in there that need to be met as it's now code required. City of Dallas is a good example of that. For a first-time build on an interior fit-out, you have to comply with the International Green Construction Code. The whole state of California is like that. They have this program called CalGreen, which is the same thing. It's literally, the state building code that you have to really comply with a lot of the stuff that's in the IGCC.
Because I think even now, like, they have completely banned oil-based paints, right? Even in residential, like, it's completely, yeah.
Yeah, and then I know I was just having a conversation with one of my guys in New York yesterday, in New York, they've basically banned gas appliances now.
Yeah,
Everything
that's
has
true.
to be electric.
Yeah, even the range. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there was all that news about with the range
Hmm.
stoves and all that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an interesting kind of movement now. One question I have is really we've talking about it, but give me just the hypothetical scenario of a day without TDS. Here at the firm, or
You mean next week when I'm on vacation?
exactly. Yeah, what's that going to be like?
Oh no, that's just a day of TDS without me, I guess.
Imagine a world where it's the episode of the Twilight Zone where you have never existed and you come into to Corgan. What does that look like?
I would say that a lot of people are going to have to learn a lot of things really fast.
The roofs are check the roofs first.
Yeah, that's an interesting question you pose there. I don't know what that would be like. I honestly, these days, I spend most of my time these days is spent answering questions from staff. The specifiers spend well, obviously, other than managing the team, but the specifiers spend most of their time writing specifications for projects. And what happens is when their projects go out for construction, there will be questions. The contractor will ask the design team a question. They'll push it through to whoever wrote the specs on it. It's a good system. It works. But I do still handle my fair share of questions. I think just because I've been here for so long and have worked with so many people, and they know I'm approachable when they have a question. So that's why I say, gosh, a day without TDS. I mean, that's a lot of people are going to have to figure stuff out on their own.
A lot of Googling.
Yeah, a lot of Googling.
A lot of Googling.
For sure.
So, Chris, tell me, what are some of the common misconceptions about technical design?
One of the common misconceptions people might have is that it's boring, particularly the specification side. I mean, the specialists, not so much, because I think the folks in the studio feel like they're contributing to the design, and to them, design is not boring. But I think, sometimes when you just say specifications, people's eyes kind of glaze over. There's a lot of reading involved, and a lot of research. But the questions that we get related to that are actually very challenging. So I don't think it's boring at all.
Well, ultimately, I think it's someone sees a set of drawings and like you said, like a lot of reading, a lot of information, and their eyes glaze over. But then you present that information in the form of a render, or an Enscape fly through, any sort of visualization, right? And they start to see that pop and come to life. But all of that will continue to be informed, like you said, from TDS. So that's
and as far as the problem solving side of it goes, it's not just about the technical design. Isn't just about roof design or door and hardware parts and pieces. One of the things that we deal with a lot actually is constructability issues, meaning an architect will send us a wall section of something that they have drawn. Or here's a better example. One time, Michael Janacek, our lighting designer, got amused because somebody wanted to do a cove light.
Okay.
Right. And they drew this. This is a floor plan. So it was a vertical cove light.
Right.
And they wanted to tuck it back in a corner. Well, the floor plan that they sent was this extremely acute angle that was probably about 3 feet deep, and the angle was probably about 10 degrees fully open, and they put the light fixture back there in the corner.
So now you're fighting physics,
how do you get this skinny guy back in there to finish off the drywall before? I mean, that's a constructability issue, right? It's like, okay, this looks great, but it's not buildable, And so I find those sorts of things challenging. It's like, okay, well, I get the design intent here, right? Now let's help them draw something that we know the contractor can build that will give them the design intent that they're looking for.
You were telling me a story about the rope lights.
Yeah.
Didn't want to be.
Let's not talk about that because that's a current project,
Okay,
and it might hurt some people's feelings. I'm not going to talk.
Okay, that was too inside baseball.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah.
Chris, this has been absolutely entertaining and enlightening for me.
Good.
I appreciate the time today.
Absolutely.
And that's it for this episode of The Square. We'll see you soon.